They woke me at 4:11 with the new run. I keep the printouts pinned above my desk because the screen lies in 100 polite ways. Paper is blunt. The overnight Monte Carlo had stopped looking like spilled noodles and cinched into a belt about 30 kilometers wide, slanting across the river and brushing our districts like a careless elbow. 72 hours of uncertainty, the duty analyst said from the doorway, rubbing the indentation of headphones off her ears. She didn't step inside. We both knew uncertainty is not a fog. It is a metronome inside your teeth. I logged the time by habit, checked that the UPS showed a clean sign, and looked past my monitors to the real artifact that matters in this room. The analog traffic controller, a beige coffin of metal and relays that hums like a tired refrigerator. We keep it because storms love computers and because the city insists on living, even when the grid forgets how. I put my hand on its flank the way you touch a pan before picking it up. Warm enough to matter? Ready or fast. Outside the windows, the river was a black length of cord, and the eastern sky had the color of an old bruise. On my first screen, the city map showed its polite midnight. Cab icons like errant fireflies. A few ambulances moving from the last bar fights of yesterday toward the first misjudged staircases of today. On the second screen, the national feed still ran a taped segment about monitoring developments. It had the too white smile of yesterday's certainty. At 4:26, the first contradictions landed like geese on a winter pond. Awkward, noisy, sure of their own direction. The national alert banner? No cause for panic. The municipal push? Prepare go bags, fuel vehicles, check medications. A photo from a cousin's cousin in a neighborhood chat. A red rectangle over our downtown labeled Impact Corridor, confirmed. It was a weather app heat map for cellular coverage during concerts. Someone had written, "Get underground. Mall's safest. -2 parking. I hadn't cleared any mall. I hadn't cleared anything." I dialed the mayor at 5:02. He answered on the first ring and sounded like he'd run stairs to find the phone. "We cannot declare full evacuation without the region's order," he said before I could speak. "If this is a false alarm..." "It's not an alarm," I said. "It's a corridor. We move people who are in the floodplain and the glass districts quietly. We keep them above ground and off the bridge quietly," he repeated, as if it were a new instrument he wasn't sure he could play. "No bridge closures. Not without a formal decree, the bridge. One eastbound artery that takes weight without crumbling. Our single habit we cannot quit. On a good day, it's a slow heartbeat. On a bad day, it's a clot. Today promised to be the second kind of day." By 5:30, the prep channels were streaming in clip tones about bunkers that had never existed. A man with a beard and a ring light called himself Resilience Certified and pointed at a mall on a satellite map with the gravitas of a surgeon. "Reinforced cap," he said. He meant a parking slab. People shared him like bread. I drafted our first message the way you cut a wire under a car. Posture balanced, breath held, knowledge of where the fuel line is. Bring water, 3 days of medication, documents, clothing for cold. Do not use underground parking. Hospitals will publish their own instructions. Avoid the river bridge until further notice. I added an unpopular line about cash. In a failure, the city remembers coins, and then I sent it through all the channels we controlled, and some we didn't, because my deputies have their own quiet networks built out of PTA groups, and cousins in maintenance. The replies started like rain. My father is bedbound. Our car has no battery. Is the mall safe? Is it true that the cathedral crypt is reinforced? We heard the army will close the highway at 8. We heard they won't. I set 2 operators to answer what could be answered and ignore ghosts. Ghosts breed when you feed them. At 6:03, I called the fuel depot and spoke to a manager who sounded older than me and younger than his job. I told him I needed priority diesel for the intersections along the ring road. If the smart system goes stupid, we hold those by hand, I said. It will be ugly. We'll need fuel to spare. He said their card readers had gone flaky and drivers were paying cash out of glove compartments for private jerry cans, just in case. Lock your forecourt, I said. I heard myself become the villain in a story told at dinner. You learn to accept it. Some stories need villains. By 6:30, the city had developed 2 contradictory habits. It ignored official instructions and also demanded more of them. I sent Yelena down the hall to the telecom liaison to statically pin our messages to the regional emergency channel. When she came back, she had the look she gets when she has been politicked at instead of served. They want us to wait for a templated paragraph from their PR, she said. They sent a draft. It has the phrase, "in an abundance of caution." We're not abundant in anything, I said. Push ours again. Attach the map of surface corridors if anyone asks why we say, avoid the bridge. On the feeds, the bridge was already a rumor. Trucks slid toward it in the slow confidence of habit. A line of private cars, a line of buses, a line of decisions people would later claim they hadn't made. At 6:54, a hospital administrator asked whether they should begin moving non-critical patients inland. I said yes, ground only, no sirens unless necessary, marked with cardboard signs, oxygen, neonates, dialysis, so drivers would part when conscience outran fear. The administrator said, "We don't have enough cardboard." I said, "You have enough bed sheets." A bedsheet is a sign you learn to think with your hands when the power wants to think for you. While I spoke, the digital control for the city's signaling network began to hiccup. Timestamps slipped. A series of greens along the ring that should have been a metered wave became a stutter. The cameras updated out of order and made the traffic look like a flipbook assembled by a bored god. I toggled the first sector on the beige panel from remote to local. The relay bit down with a solid click that tasted like iron on my tongue. We train this procedure once a year and joke about it afterward. You stand with one finger on the switch, counting 90 seconds, 120, listening for the cadence of a city that breathes in vehicles. The joke is funny on normal days because it's about how quaint we are. Today it wasn't quaint. It was the only reliable metronome left. Sector A to Green westbound. Hold 90, I said, and Yelena, who can count and write and signal at once like an octopus, mirrored the rhythm with her hands for the volunteers we had placed at outlying cabinets. Kids in fluorescent vests with keys that open metal boxes that smell like hot rain. Release feeder 5, choke river spur 3, hold. I felt the city respond in jerks. A clot loosened on the ring. A tram crossed a junction without stalling its own artery. Downtown coughed and then swallowed air. The bridge remained itself, a promise and a threat. At 7:12, the first video from the bridge appeared, a split screen of 2 tankers inching toward the same lane in a ballet of blameless miscommunication. One carried MEKP, a curing agent with a temper. The other, liquid chlorine, headed toward a water plant on the far side of the river. The smart lane control had flashed them both green, misreading the cues. Neither driver could back up without starting a brawl of bumpers, and neither dared move forward into the other's shadow. They stopped. Gravity did the rest. A knot is only a line you didn't think you would need to untie. I called the police captain stationed at the near approach. He had the voice of a man who had already said too many calm things to people who weren't listening. "We can thread a car or two along the shoulder," he said, "but anything big is stuck. Tow from the rear is blocked by the trucks because whoever set the cones assumed the cones mattered." He laughed once without humor. "Do I push them?" "This is chlorine and organic peroxide. I don't want to roll the dice on a karaoke of sirens halfway up a steel arch." "Do nothing without my count," I said. "We will hold the arteries around you and bleed off pressure upstream." He made a sound that could have been agreement or prayer. The mayor called again at 7:18. Voice flattened the way a caller ID flattens a name. "We cannot signal panic," he said, as if panic were a color you could choose not to spray. "The region expects coordinated messaging?" "Then coordinate this," I said. "Malls are not shelters. Underground parking is a trap. Hospitals move their own. Everyone else goes to ground-level structures with exterior exits. And we do not let that bridge fill. We need to hold it at a trickle, or we will never clear it." He said, "Without a decree, I cannot authorize a closure." And I heard papers moving on his desk like small birds. "The optics are for photographers," I said, and regretted the snap, even as it left my mouth. People are moving toward the mall because a man with a ring light told them to. Tell them all to open the loading dock and keep the doors at street level unlocked. If they insist on becoming a chimney, they can at least let smoke out. You have no authority over private security," he said. And this time I didn't sigh. I said, "Authority is what you exercise before you grow a spine in hindsight." I hung up softer than I wanted to. Rage bends the hand you need to keep steady. I rested my palm on the beige metal, took a breath, and returned to counting. 90 seconds green, 30 seconds amber, 45 seconds to clear the fools who read amber as a dare. At 7:23, as if the city wanted to scroll its own punchline across my map, the hazmat icons on the bridge went from stationary to blinking. Not movement, public interest. People had left their cars to film the placards. Phones were raised like lighters at a concert. The algorithm that flags unsafe congregation painted a small blush around them. One dot flickered and fell. I tasted copper again. We pushed our second message with teeth in it. Do not approach the bridge. Do not stop to film. Keep intersections clear for emergency vehicles. Avoid underground spaces. We attached a simple diagram of what blast waves do to glass, arrows across a floor plan, a shower of vector lines, because pictures travel where words are not welcome. The comments bloomed anyway. Government wants us exposed. Malls are reinforced. My cousin's friend is in the army and says the bridge is the safest because it is designed for loads. I caught myself typing a reply and stopped. The city does not need my sarcasm. It needs my counting. By 8, the operations room had become a throat. Volunteers moved through it in lines that learned not to intersect. Someone had taped paper to the tiles, and was chalking our light timings in thick numbers so the runners could memorize them before sprinting back to the cabinets. The telecom liaison arrived with a folder of printed emails that made promises to nobody and warmed no hands. She sat on the edge of a table and, without being asked, began calling every mall and big box store in the corridor, asking about doors, generators, air handling, whether they knew how to unlock loading docks from the inside. "We are not authorized to give instructions," one security manager said, and she made her voice into a scalpel. "I'm not giving you instructions. I'm telling you what you'll wish you'd done." I walked the room in a slow square, checking names against tasks like a pre-flight. One operator riding the ring, one on the hospital convoy channel, one on the police net, one on the water utility. They would need to prepare for turbidity. Elena had posted a piece of paper at eye level that read simply, "Breathe." She wasn't being cute. Counting is breath. If your breath goes wrong, your count goes wrong, and then lights fight instead of dance. At 8:40, we learned that one of the big hospitals had sent their non-critical patients toward a suburban clinic that sat inside the new pinch of the belt. No one had asked us. They had followed the plan. The plan was an old circle on an old map from an old drill where the corridor had lain the other way. I told the convoy to turn before the interchange and use the surface streets with trees close in. "Why the trees?" the driver asked. "Because shade keeps people calmer," I said, and only later realized I had stolen that line from an instructor who taught us about crowd dynamics and heat waves. Crisis teaching is all theft. You take the best language you've heard and spend it quickly. Somewhere around 9, we committed to what the room already knew. We would not wait for a decree to make decisions that cannot be unmade. I didn't say the word closure. I said we would meter the bridge to 1 lane outbound, police escort only, and hold the rest upstream until we could bleed pressure around to the far span. It was a decision measured in curses on social media and lives we would never count. I signed the internal order and put the time next to it, because time is what they try to edit later. The digital dashboard began to flick like a fish thrown onto a dock. "NTP drift," the sysadmin yelled from his corner. GPS spiking, cameras buffering frames out of sequence. "Analog," I said, a little too loud, and my operators answered without turning their heads. We shed the choreography that looks slick in peacetime and returned to the clumsy grace that works when clocks disagree. A human counting, another human running, a city moving because 2 hands say now. I called the mayor at 9:22 and told him what I would do if he did not order it himself. He said the word lawsuits like a life jacket he intended to inflate later. I said the words chlorine and organic peroxide and children like weights attached to a rope. He promised a press availability to reassure the public. I told him what to say if he insisted on reassurance. Things are under management. Bring water, bring meds, stay above ground, avoid the bridge. He repeated the phrases like a catechism and hung up. I went back to counting. By 10, the room smelled like coffee that had stopped doing its job an hour ago, and sweat that hadn't learned to apologize yet. A volunteer who couldn't be older than 20 wrote our cycle numbers on her forearm with a Sharpie so she wouldn't drop them on the run. 2 maintenance men arrived with a crate of hand tools, unasked. The kind who know which cabinets will fight you about their own keys. I nodded at them and pointed toward the sector that had started to squeal. They nodded back like priests trading chalices. The corridor tightened again on the printout at 10:15, 5 kilometers south. It didn't sound like much when you said it in a room. It was a lifetime if your house stood on the new line. I updated the board, swallowed the taste of copper, and told the telecom liaison to target the new postal codes with our message about staying above ground and leaving now to prearranged addresses inland. They'll ask about shelters, she said, already dialing. Tell them schools with exterior doors and low garages with open ramps, I said. Tell them a church with windows is better than a mall with glory. The mall security chief finally called us back at 10:32. We're not authorized to make announcements, he said. People are going down because it's cooler. I told him to prop the loading dock doors and keep the roll-ups from auto-locking. If you trap people under your slab and the ventilation fails, you will smell their fear until the carpets rot, I said. He breathed into the phone twice. Who will authorize me? He asked. I will, I said. Write down my name. At 11 o'clock, the minute hand and my breath aligned. The room hushed itself without being told. We had bled a little pressure from the bridge approaches. A few buses made the long arc towards the far span. The hazmat trucks waited, stubborn and blameless, under a sky that had decided to be extracted tooth white. The ring held an ornery pulse, green 90, amber 5, red 60, rest again. I stood with my hand on the warm metal and felt the city run through it like a current. We were not safe. We were not even stable. But the corridor had narrowed to the shape of our choices, and for the first time since 4/11, those choices felt like actions instead of apologies. Diesel? I asked Yelena without looking at her. 2 hours at current draw, she said, pen tapping the margin of a notebook that had long ago absorbed the thumbprint oils of our worst days. Then we start losing pretties. Kill the pretties now, I said. Leave arteries only. She relayed the order and then wrote a single word in the top corner of the board where everyone could see it when they lifted their eyes between counts. Corridor. It reminded me the city is not a place. It is a narrowing. You make it wide enough to live through, and then you live through. The bridge waited. The trucks waited. The city counted with me. The clock said morning still, but I had already burned through a day. I rolled my shoulders, reset my jaw, and gave the next number out loud so my own voice would hear me. Sector A, green. At 11:03, the school bus called in from the river bend, voice thin with that practice cheer drivers use when the kids can hear them. Battery dead. 41 children, 1 adult, a smell of warm plastic and breath. The tow we dispatched at dawn was now a rumor somewhere mid-bridge behind the hazmat stalemate. I put the bus on speaker and let my voice go low. Windows cracked, seat belts on, put it in neutral, and keep your hands off the wheel unless I tell you otherwise. The children laughed because fear always wants a joke. The driver's laugh had the burr of tears. I sent 2 volunteer teams in a pickup with tow straps. Wrong way down a shoulder we were holding with a dozen beeps and 100 seconds of hand-timed reds. Elena carved them a corridor with the analog steps like a surgeon pinches an artery. Ring to green, river spur to red. Feeder, 3:30 seconds. Hold. I could feel the city brace around that decision. cars fidgeting, horns writing insults in Morse, and then accept it, because a body will let you hurt it if you promise to make the pain make sense. While the pickup fought toward the bus, the misinformation metastasized. The beard with the ring light pinned a new post at 11:11. Aurora Mall, level -2, reinforced, verified by engineers. His engineer was a photo of a hard hat. Comments stacked like bricks. People were already parking, already letting the escalator carry them into the cool hum of a space designed to flatter crowds into docility. We pushed our rebuttal again. Ground level only, exterior exits, no underground parking. Threaded it with a diagram of pressure waves and the ugly arrows of what glass does when it fails. The replies were a mirror breaking. Government wants us exposed. We will be crushed in the street. The mall has concrete. A rumor said the mall had government supplies. The only supplies it had were floor polishers and pretzels. At 11:17, the toe straps went tight. I heard the grunt through the pickup's open mic, the rattle of a clutch at the edge of what a clutch can be. The bus rolled and 41 voices whooped so hard the driver forgot how to breathe for a beat. "Neutral?" I reminded her. "You're rolling now. You're doing great. Look at me. Not at the fear." She laughed again, cleaner. The pickup's engine smelled like hot pennies, but it crawled the bus out of the bend and onto the feeder we held with red on 3 sides, and the kind of faith you only see in math class and war. The hazmat knot on the bridge grew teeth, and people left their cars to film the placards as if the right angle would divulge safety. On our feed, the crowd blush around the tankers, pulsed with little amber beads, proximity alerts chirping into the void. Someone slipped. The dot that was him went vertical and then disappeared behind a bumper. We forced a ladder truck the long way through backlots and pallets and a yard full of rusted pipes. Every forced light was a coin toss, and every coin we lost would be metal on metal at an intersection we still needed later. I kept counting. Counting was the only prayer I believed in. At 11:30, the mayor arrived with 2 cameras and a press secretary whose smile came in sprayable layers. He was stylish, shirt sleeves rolled like a performance of seriousness. Sweat mapped crescents under his arms. "We need to say clearly that things are under control," he began, rehearsed. The cameramen smelled like plastic, their lenses pointed at our faces, not at the panel. "Things are under management," I said. Control is a word for memoirs written after funerals. I pointed at the screen. 2 hazardous loads locked horn to horn by a hallucination of smart lane control. We meet at the bridge to 1 escorted lane, or we close it. If we leave it open to habit, it will become a trap you will call a tragedy later. Those are the choices. Choose? "We have no decree," he said. "There will be Waka lawsuits. The region is catching its own tail," I said. "Gravity is not waiting for a decree." I could hear the acid in my tone and dialed it back. "If you won't sign it, I will. The paper will read the same either way. Only the name at the bottom changes." He glanced at the beige panel, then at the cameras, then at his press secretary, who had found a spot for her mint gum under her tongue and armor on her eyes. "If you do this," he said, voice low enough, the microphones probably missed it, "you do it alone?" "I woke up alone at 4:11, I said, and signed the internal order. Time, name, a line that would become a runway for blame. We issued 15 minutes warning. Avoid the bridge. Police escort only. Barriers descending at 12:15. The feed showed the bridge tense like a muscle before a cramp. A motorcyclist tried to squirt through between bumpers and almost became a shape on the asphalt. Horns rose and fell in waves, the city speaking in a language it hates hearing itself use. "Diesel," I said, without turning. 2 hours at current draw, Elena answered. Then we start losing choreography. When the pretty dies, the ugly gets loud. "Kill the pretty now," I said. "Boulevards, plazas, anything ornamental, arteries only." She relayed the cuts. Downtown dimmed by degrees, like an aquarium shutting down to save the pump. At 11:48, the mall's security chief finally called back. "We are not authorized to make announcements," he repeated, stubborn as policy. "People are calmer underground. It's cooler." I held back the part of me that wanted to spit. "Prop the loading dock doors," I said. "Unlock the roll-ups and keep them unlocked. Post someone at every stairwell. You will start shepherding people to ground level in groups small enough to keep from stampeding. If you trap them and the ventilation fails, you will smell them in the carpets for a year. If you do this right, no one will thank you. Those are your choices." He swallowed, but I could hear it. "Who authorizes me?" "I do," I said and spelled my name. At 12:03, the pickup with the bus reported clear of the feeder. I pictured the driver's hands still trembling on the wheel she wasn't holding. "Park on the school's inner loop," I said. "Kids to the gym hall, 2 water lines, windows cracked. Parents will try to breach the fence in 15 minutes. Let the teachers handle the gate. Volunteers hold the crowd by talking, not shouting, talking." It felt obscene to be this specific. It also felt like oxygen. The police captain at the bridge came back on channel. "They're gonna make me the most hated man in town?" he asked, trying on a laugh that didn't fit him. "I'll be right there next to you," I said. "We can share a placard." He said, "If anyone throws a flare, I'm gonna cry." And I loved him for admitting the fear I'd been metabolizing since dawn. At 12:10, I did the small things you do before a big thing. Checked a pen, drank water, pressed my palm to the warm metal of the panel, as if it were a living flank. Elena tapped a rhythm on the desk with her thumbnail to keep us on the same count. The room, which had been a storm of motion, shifted into a held note. Even the cameras quieted. At 12:15, we dropped the barriers. The feed shuddered as cars changed their minds in a single jerky motion. A choir of horns stood up on its back legs and howled. Somewhere a driver threw a bottle. Somewhere a child clapped at the noise as if the city had learned a new song. The captain's voice. "Inbound lane dead? Escort forming. Wish me lunacy, I wished him numbers. Numbers are kinder." Traffic upstream began to bend around the shape we wanted. Columns to the ring, then to the inland roads. The detour that looks like insult until you count the lives on the other side. We pushed the convoy timings over radio where anyone with a scanner could hear them. If you tell a city what you're doing, sometimes it helps you do it. By 12:21, the first ambulance in our hospital convoy reported a blockage at a gated community's electronic barrier. No power to the keypad, no person in the booth. A metal arm asserting property in a voice no one could ignore. "Break it," I said. "You need me to authorize?" "You did already," the driver said, and the grunt of the bumper ram came through like an animal sound. At 12:27, a hiss from Sector D told me a cabinet had decided to die with drama. 2 maintenance men, the same 2 who had turned up with tools unasked, were already on their way, with a bag that clanked. "We can hotwire the phase," one said. "She'll run ugly, but she'll run." "Ugly is the house style today," I said, and their laughter was brief and grateful. At 12:32, the press conference began in the next room. I could hear the mayor's voice through the door as if the wall were an eardrum. The words were the ones I had put in his mouth. Under management, avoid underground spaces, bring water and medications. The cameras would catch his jawline, the little glisten at his temple, the attentive nods of the fake green plants. Out here, a volunteer rode the new ring cycle on her forearm with a Sharpie and jogged for the cabinet before the sweat could lift the ink. At 12:40, the beard with the ring light posted alive from the mall's -2. "Government lies," he said to 2,000 faces in his pocket. "It's safe here." Look, he panned across concrete and people and the illusion of protection. The comments loved him for loving them. We didn't argue. We called the mall again. The security chief had done as told and sounded like a man who had just discovered he could disobey the wrong person. Loading dock open, guards on every stair. We're moving them up in strings of 20. Some refuse. "Leave a corridor free," I said. "Fear piles in doorways." "Copy," he said, and "not authorized." And I put that in the small box in my mind where I keep good things for later. At 12:53, the chlorine driver asked if he should stay in his cab or run. The captain kept his voice steady. "Stay. Engine off, windows up. We have monitors out." I pictured him leaning into the cab window, leather creaking, hand on the door frame to show he would touch the danger with the person he was asking not to move. Leadership is often a hand where everyone can see it. By 1300, the bridge was a contour line. In my mind, I could trace with my eyes closed. The analog panel hummed at a pitch my ribs had matched without my permission. The ring held on ugly settings that moved bodies instead of pleasing them. The diesel gauge crept down as if time had grown teeth. We started cutting deeper. Decorative districts were already dark. We pulled power from synchronized squares, from fountains, from the programmable hearts of intersections no longer in use. Somebody turned off a boulevard's midday music, and a flock of pigeons rose like torn paper. The city began to sound like breath through a straw, and our own counting. At 13:10, a mother called from a car with 2 children and a tank below the red line. "I'm stuck. They say the ring is jammed. My youngest is diabetic." I asked for her location, and goggles on, traced her dot against the arteries we still worked by hand. "You're 5 blocks from the water plant," I said. "Pull in there. Park by the brick wall with the blue door. There's shade. Someone will bring you juice. Leave the engine off. Count with me." I counted her 30 breaths and sent a runner with a bottle from our break room and a vial from the hospital kit we kept for just in case. That had come true too often to still be called that. At 13:20, the pickup that had hauled the bus limped back into the yard, clutch stinking like scorched toast. The volunteers climbed out and stood with their hands on their knees, heads down the way you stand after a run when you expect your heart to fall out. One of them had written our cycle numbers on his arm, the ink bled by sweat into a bruise-colored blur. I sent them to the sink and then to the cot. They slept for 11 minutes and woke to go again, because that is how this day worked. The mayor came back without cameras at 13:35. The tie was still missing. The crescents under his arms had grown. He didn't ask for quotes. He didn't mention decrees. He looked at the bridge feed and then at me. "Keep it closed," he said, very quietly. "If they ask, I was never here." I nodded, too tired and too grateful to solve that with irony. I thought of the children in the gym with their palms flat on the polished floorboards, the way kids always test any surface. I thought of the man on -2 talking to his phone about safety, as if the word could thicken the air. I thought of the drivers whose loyalty was habit, and the habit that was a bridge. I thought of the analog panel under my palm like a patient animal that had chosen to trust me. And I kept counting. 90, 560, hold, release, choke, breathe. And the closure finally looked like a shape in the world instead of a sentence on paper, when the ring flexed and the inland roads took their insult and swallowed it. And the hazmat knot stopped pulsing with onlookers and settled into a tense, ugly peace. I let myself glance at the clock. It said 14:02. The corridor had narrowed. Everything I loved was inside it. There was still a city to teach how to breathe. I put my hand back on the warm beige metal and gave the next number to the room like a small, sufficient gift. By 1640, the light went the color of old paper, and the latest printout slid under my palm like a test I wasn't ready to grade. The belt had inched north by a fingernail. On the wall map, that meant a suburb moved from maybe to coin flip. On my tongue, it turned certainty into copper. We targeted those postal codes with a message we'd rewritten 3 times until it fit inside a pulse. Leave now to prearranged addresses, inland. Stay above ground. Avoid bridge. Use surface corridors, a 3, C1. In the seconds between send and see, my mind filled the space with faces we'd never meet. Answers came back fast, messy, human. No car. Grandma can't walk. The mall has guards. Safe there. We built small convoys out of what answered the phone. Electricians' vans, a florist's truck with a cartoon tulip on the side, a plumber's boxy blue that still smelled like glue and pipe dope. We taped signs in their windows with whatever was not yet spoken for. Cardboard, bedsheets ripped into banners with thick black marker. Oxygen, neonates, dialysis. The city's drivers read the signs like scripture. Some parted, some cut them off anyway, and then pretended they hadn't. At 17:10, the fuel depot called to say their last generator drum was gone. "Stolen?" I asked, already braced. "Paid," the manager said. "Cash." I didn't look close. The room didn't have space for rage, so I put the feeling somewhere small, like a coin you keep in your shoe to remind yourself how to walk. The bridge stayed closed under our name. The hazmat trucks sat in their own tense Sabbath. The captain checked them like you check a sleeping toddler. Too often, too softly to wake them, ready to snatch them if a dream turned sudden. We kept the ring moving, ugly and effective. The hum of the analog panel under my hand like a heartbeat I could control by counting. At 17:35, word slid down the hallway like a spilled drink. The region might order the bridge reopened to reduce economic friction. I printed the time of arrival calculations and pinned the sheet to the mayor's attention with my voice. "An open bridge is a wish," I said, "and wishes don't slow waves." He stared at the equations the way a man might look at a tide. Interested, powerless, tired. Then he nodded once. "Keep it closed," he said. "If they ask, I wasn't here." He left his gaze on the paper a second longer, as if memorizing numbers could be a kind of penance, then went where mayors go when the pictures are done and the math starts. We rerouted daylight into columns that looked like humility if you didn't know the count behind them. The inland roads took their insult and swallowed. The ring held together by our hands and the stubbornness of old relays. Every time I asked for diesel, the answer came back smaller. Every time a volunteer returned, the Sharpie ink on their arms was smudged a little further into bruise blue. The Aurora Mall called again when the security chief ran out of authorization and found only people. "We're moving them up," he said, voice rough as gravel, "but some won't leave the cool." "Then you leave them a corridor," I said. "Fear piles in doorways." "You know this now," he exhaled. "We've posted a cleaning crew as ushers. They're better at keeping order than the guards." Of course they were. People who touch the floors always know the building best. At 1822, the hospital convoy came up on a gated community where the keypad blinked like a child with a secret. No power, no guard, a metal arm insisting that property outlived breath. "Cram it," I said. "Paper will hate you. The people won't." The driver laughed once, short. "Paper has never put in an IV," she said. And the thud of plywood yielding sounded like a permission finally granted. Sunset thickened. The city developed new shadows and kept the old ones. We dimmed whole districts like aquariums you shut down to save the pump. A lonely fountain still danced in a square because no one had told it the day had turned into the kind that doesn't want pretty things. Elena wrote the new cycles in thicker digits on the board, then tore a strip off the bottom and taped it to her wrist like a tourniquet for time. At 1907, we got a photo from the bus driver. Children in the school gym, sitting cross-legged on polished floor, each with a cup of water like a prize. A teacher handing out crayons from a box that looked like sunshine. A boy holding a sign made of 2 taped sheets that said, "Thank you, bus rope lady." The exclamation marks marched like tiny soldiers. I put the picture where I could see it when I lifted my eyes from the panel. When your job is numbers, you need proof that numbers hold people inside them. The mall problem refused to end. A man with a beard and an audience filmed himself declaring safety under concrete. Behind him, an outlet strip dangled like a promise overtooled. The comments bloomed like algae. Government wants you exposed. He's the only one telling the truth. The security chief sent a second photo. Stairwell doors propped with yellow caution cones. Loading dock rolled up like a yawn. In the frame's edge, a child held a parent's hand and looked up at the slice of evening like it was the sky's first apology. "We've got them moving," the chief said. "We'll never get them all." "You won't," I said. "Do it anyway." At 1940, the rumor about reopening arrived again, this time with names attached. I didn't reprint the math. I pointed at the panel and the feeds and the checklist on the wall that had acquired crease lines, but our fingers kept finding it. The mayor came back in, very suddenly older, and looked at me without lifting his hands from his pockets. "Keep it closed," he repeated, "and if they ask, I still wasn't here." "Understood," I said, which in our language meant, "I'll carry it." At 2010, we sent our last daylight convoys. We blessed the drivers, who still owned paper maps, and the bodies who could read them. We laughed once, exhausted, at a florist's truck leading a string of white vans, like a wedding procession with all the wrong music. We winced at the inevitable fender bender we didn't have police to spare for, and watched a stranger get out of his car to direct traffic with arms that knew how to count. Every city has a small platoon of people who do the right thing without being asked. You don't learn their names, but you remember their elbows. The first cold of night tasted like tin. The room's air turned sharp. We handed out jackets that had spent years hung on the back of chairs for drills no one believed in. The analog panel's hum dropped half a note as the load shifted. The cameras picked up more reflections than surfaces. Glass plus darkness makes a liar of every eye. At 22:03 it came. Not the sky rip open, no cinema, no trumpet, but a pressure passing through the world like a hand pressed flat against a door from the other side. In the room, everyone went quiet at the same time without having agreed. The river gave a sound like a long exhale. On the far edges of the feed, office floors, emptied by prudence, shed their glass the way trees shed leaves. Too fast, too many, all at once. The bridge shivered and held, empty, except for the two drivers we had asked not to be heroes. They sat still and let the night gratitude find them, though it would take a week for their wrists to stop smelling of rubber and regret. Then silence, large and humming. Radios cleared their throats. Someone laughed because their body needed a noise. I realized I had been holding my breath, not for seconds, as I thought, but for a life measured in kinds of waiting I had not had to learn before this day. Reports, I said, and the room began to read its own heartbeat back to itself. Suburb South, broken windows, no structural collapse. Hospital convoy, arrived. Neonates counted, oxygen above 95. Industrial backlot, small fires, contained. Water utility, turbidity rising, manageable. Mall, half out, half down. Ventilation holding, security now hoarse from repeating ground level and exterior exits. Ring, ugly but green. Diesel, teeth scrape low. By 1:10, the city became a patience we could inhabit. Volunteers slept in turns on cots that felt like raincoat fabric stretched over regret. I left my hand on the panel even when I didn't need to touch it. The warmth was proof of work, and I needed proof even more than sleep. At 3:40, the wave's late rumor reached us as a smaller tremor, a door upstairs rattled by a distant argument. It passed. The clocks agreed again, the way a family agrees to eat in the same room after a fight. I set 3 alarms and let myself close my eyes on a bench that was never meant for that. The alarm I didn't set, worry, woke me first. Dawn did not so much arrive as reveal that it had been standing there all along, politely waiting. The city looked at itself in shards. In early light, people with brooms stepped into streets as if sweeping were a way of choosing to stay. Businesses taped polite diagonals over spiderweb glass. A man in a reflective vest lifted a broken sign out of a tree as carefully as if it were a bird. The bus driver came herself, eyes swollen from a sleep that hadn't agreed to come when asked, and put a box on our table. Candy and a folded sheet with thank you, written 5 times in different hands, and one drawing, crayon bold, of a toe strap, like a friendly snake dragging a whale with wheels. Someone started crying and pretended to cough. Yelena put the paper on the wall, above breathe. Now the room had 2 commandments, and they matched. The lawyer arrived after, shoes too clean, voice already formatted. He held a folder like a weapon, and the expression of a man who believes in rules because they have always treated him as someone to be shown their best face. "We'll need you at the inquiry," he said. "There are questions about exceeding mandate, unauthorized closure, economic damages." He used damages like a spell. He looked at the mayor's empty chair, then at me. "Also, please return departmental keys until the investigation concludes." I thought of the keys, brass worn smooth by 1,000 small mercies, the analog one heavy enough to bruise a palm if you carried it wrong. I set them on the table the way you set down a child at the end of a dance. His pen hovered. "You acknowledge," he said, and I signed my name beneath a paragraph that declared itself neutral, the way fog declares itself weather. "Were you afraid?" he asked, and I almost laughed. Afraid is an ocean. My job is learning which cup to pour it into so we can drink and not drown. "Yes," I said. He looked pleased to have an answer that fit a script. "And you closed the bridge without a decree?" "I kept it closed," I said. It already knew what it needed to be. After he left, the room felt bigger and emptier, like a gym after a graduation. People moved with the exaggerated quiet of those who don't want to disturb a set of chairs someone had just made straight. I stood in the doorway and finally let myself be tired. On my way out, I passed the bus shelter nearest the river. Someone had taped a printout of our first message under cracked plexiglass. Underneath, written in a careful hand with a marker that had given up twice before finishing, "Thank you for saying something that helped." The letters leaned into one another like people on a bench. I took a photo and didn't send it to anyone. Some things you keep because proof is a private kind of relief. I walked to the bank and watched the bridge from below. Trucks moved in patient pairs over the far span, the one we'd made them learn to love by force. The hazmat drivers had gone with the dawn convoy, escorted like kings without a kingdom, while the city pretended not to watch. The river under the near span sucked at its own edge, brown and wide and uninterested in our decisions. The bridge itself looked as it always had, concrete and steel and habit. From this angle, it was impossible to see us taped over its mouth like a hand. A gull shouted obscenity at no one. Somewhere a tram set its wheels against the curve, and won. The wind moved along the water like a brush. There will be an inquiry. There will be columns of words about process, about who gets to breathe and who must ask. Someone will say the corridor shifted anyway, that the belt moved a hair, that the worst missed by a geography test's width, that we made pain where none was guaranteed. The papers will make grids of alternatives and blame and cost. The television will find a better jawline to tell the story with. They will ask me again, under good lights and dry throats, were you afraid? As if courage were the absence of fear and not a way of counting through it. As if a bridge were a symbol and not a decision that kills you if you get it wrong. The truth is unphotogenic. I put my hand on a warm piece of metal and told a living thing when to breathe. I watched a city obey in jerks. I said no to an easy word, open, because the math said it would break us. I kept a mole from becoming a tomb by asking a man to do something his job didn't teach him, but his hands knew. I asked strangers to become corridors for each other, and some of them did. We kept the bridge closed. We turned columns around. We made fewer widows. It wasn't pretty. It wasn't heroic. It was correct. And now, a chair in a quiet kitchen, a phone that still fits my hand, a city that will sleep because it is too tired to do anything else. In the sky, somewhere behind the bruised daylight and the administrative verbs, the thing that did not hit us moves on along the line gravity wrote for it. We will give it a name, if we haven't already. We will put that name on mugs and jokes and papers. Children will memorize it for a quiz and forget it for a song. But tonight, when I close my eyes, I will still be counting. Not seconds, breaths, not laws, lives. The corridor narrows. It always narrows. You stand inside it with your hand raised and your number ready. And you hope the city remembers how to keep time with you. If tomorrow brings a new belt, a different angle, another rumor pretending to be a plan, I know what the warm metal will feel like, and what word the bridge will try to be, and how fear will taste when it turns into something you can pour. I know the sound of 41 children cheering a toe strap, and the exact tone a man's voice finds when he chooses people over policy. If they take my keys for good, I will count from home. Someone else will put their hand on the panel. I hope they have a Yelena. I hope someone writes, breathe, where they can see it. And someone tapes a thank you, where it will catch the light at dawn. I hope the city listens to the counting from a new mouth and says, as softly as a door closing on a storm, we hear you. Then I will sleep. And when I wake, if the phone rings at 4:11, I will answer